So I'm a bit frazzled at the moment because I've just submitted my thesis. So all my thoughts are kind of like it was like 4 weeks ago, but I'm still burning. And as you can see from my desktop, things are a little hectic at the moment. I think I'm going on. Anyway, this is fine. So I just kind of scraped loads of ideas from my thesis into something that I could just like do some talking points about, and I've got 2 videos of like works I've done, just lifted out my portfolio. So I'm going to start with so I could talk about myself for a bit. That's easy. So my background, I studied electronic engineering with music at Leeds Uni, which was a bit of a weird course, and they didn't really manage to synthesise the 2 subjects very effectively. I'm saying that on camera. But I actually did teach on the course for a year, but ended up elsewhere. So I started looking outside, and I was going to like conferences when I was an undergraduate, trying to like find some meaning in what I was doing. And then somehow ended up doing starting my PhD age 22 with very little like meaningful thought. But I had a really excellent supervisor, so Keefe, and that really helped get me into it. So my undergraduate work was looking at like distributed performances and how systems of like vibrating devices could be used to do like distributed performances and translate beat through vibration. And there's actually now like loads of commercial products that do that. So you get like Apple Watches that do it, and something called the Soundbrenner Pulse that does it as well. And they're all a bit fancier than my weird like motors that some people got electric shocks from, which I completely deny any workaround. And then as I started finishing my PhD, I began reframing it a little bit, because I began working in the media department at Leeds and teaching practice-based research. And I actually learned a lot more about practice-based research doing that than I had done during the first 3 years of my PhD, because I was having to teach it. And it also made me think more about how my work sits as a media form. So I started my PhD looking to connect ideas of like how you could make something more emotional with vibrations. But actually that's something that's quite, there's not much background to go on that, so it would just been a spurious mess. So I ended up grappling, just trying to find ways of thinking about how vibrations and sound are connected. And obviously they are like really inherently in their physical form. So at the start of my thesis, I wrote this little passage, and it's kind of influenced by some reading I did of, like, Evelyn Glennie did this hearing essay, and every haptics scholar quotes it. And what's interesting about haptics music people is a lot of them do seem to be women. And I think there's a big connection between the idea of this embodied vibration and femininity, and how the body can be placed back into the sound through this like extra vibration sensation. So I've written, sound is grounded in the body. It is a corporeal form in its conception, production and reception, instigated by a kinesthetic motion, a physical movement of an object in space, a step, a tap, a stroke, a speaker. Sound moves through space as vibration. Sound is actuated and propagated through materials, through objects, air and you. It enters you and is interpreted by you. Whilst complex mechanisms in the ear allow you to hear sound, your body feels it. Your body mediates your experience of sound. We interact with sound, it embeds within us, and it is sculpted by our physicality as we form it. Sound is physical. It is formed and received as vibration. When the physical sensations of sound go unnoticed, they are still embedded within us. Through sound, we place and displace ourselves. And I kind of went on a bit for another 30,000 words. But recently I've been trying to do some reading, trying to connect more feminist theory within my work. And just on the train I saw today this nice quote from Dawn Smith. I put Julie, but it's Dawn. And she writes, so she's talking about improvisation as a feminist practice. Sound writes upon the exterior surfaces and interior substances of the body with an invisible ink that leaves its mark as it evaporates and disappears. The invisible presence of sound complicates the visual basis of intelligibility to underscore the corporeal as an improvisational process of sounding, audition, rewriting and transformation. So it's kind of echoing similar thoughts to what I was having in my work. And it's nice because it connects. I'm also an improviser, so I really enjoyed seeing her sort of perspective on the acting body within a performance. So in my practice, I explored approaches to employing haptics as a mechanism through which we can extend our experience of sound, conceived very broadly, by achieving a greater control of its physical presence. In this talk, I will discuss ideas pertaining to sound as a physical and embodied practice and the ways in which I've explored this through developing conceptual systems relating sonic and physical materials. And during the production of this work, I found central themes of embodiment, obviously, and I felt like there was a lot of ideas of embodiment coming up in previous talks, mediation and immersion. So there's a lot of discussion of haptics as an immersive technology in VR and stuff. And there's Bodies in Code by, and he talks a lot about how, I can't remember his name. I'll put my references up online. Sorry, I just kind of had a brain expel. I'll try to show you some videos for a bit and gather myself together. So this is one of the earliest works I developed and redeveloped more recently, and it looks at how sound and space are connected. So I've done a few versions of it, and the first was this grid of vibrating motors, and the sound just moved along your back, and I sort of mapped the 3D sound image onto the back, but it didn't work very well, and there were lots of issues because I was using pure data, which just doesn't work so great with the Arduino, which is like a microcontroller that was doing all the stuff with the motors. So I redid it and made this belt that actually barely fits around my midriff at the moment, but so it's movable, and I've made myself a little extender, the stress expander. So this is from an exhibition I did in Bradford, which was funded by the Centre for Practice-Based Research in the Arts, at Fuse Art Space. It's filmed by Anya Stewart-Maggs. So I just asked her to kind of talk to people using it. Oops. So the belt is here, and all these little pockets contain motors that I hand sewed. So the sound moves on a plane around your head and around your midriff at the same time.
Yeah, I thought it was really different. It really made the music a lot more kind of modelling. It was quite weird how you suddenly felt the pitch in your body as opposed to just hearing the pitch, which you don't normally get, or maybe you do, but you don't get really aware of it. And even when I wasn't listening to the music then, when I took the headphones off at the end, I could almost still feel the kind of pitch in the vibrations of the music, which was quite cool.
It reminded me of those graphical musical scores where you have separate voices represented graphically rather than just in terms of as a score. Well, in this case, you don't have it graphically notated, but for your body.
So there's different videos of the event online that I can share. But it was quite interesting that people perceived pitch through it when it was actually just looking at location. And how it began to bring other musical parameters into this experience when it was actually quite clearly to me, a spatial mapping. So that was kind of a really early work I developed, where I was looking at musical parameters and then kind of directly transcribing them to a physical model. And I also did this with loudness as well, so playing with like loudness of motors, loudness of sound, and the vibration amplitude of motors. So my work kind of developed a bit further, particularly as I started my live practice, and I began to see how the vibrations could be integrated into performances and used as a way for me to like touch the listener. So one of the pieces I developed was a work where vibrators would be scattered around, and I live code, so it would haptify my key presses, so people could feel the physical gesture of my performance rendered on their bodies. And then I kind of, have I got
about 2 minutes?
2 minutes. So I developed my kind of conceptual work further, and I began working with a dancer and using her body as an actuator as opposed to the vibrators. So using kind of similar programming methods, approaches to coding as I do in my live coding practice, looking at pattern. We began developing a language through which we could kind of communicate with a notation for us to communicate. So this is an example of a bit of code that we did. So that would be move your head, your foot, your head, and your foot for a speed of 313, whatever that meant, and then a direction of up and down, as follows. But what we found is that actually it was really heavy, like cognitive load on the dancer. So we began looking at how we could program for sensations rather than program for kind of discrete movements, because the body is like connected within itself. So we found some moves in the old system were impossible because it would be like put both legs up really high. And she was a great mover, Sarah Maria Cook, the dancer I was working with. But not that good. I mean, that's not normal, so it's fine. So we began looking at how we could like render code as a sensation in her body from the center of her body outwards. So we started thinking about like using coding muscle texture, skin texture, and bone texture to kind of elicit a sensation within her body. And I'll sort of show you. So these are the sorts of performances. It was quite. This was quite funny. This was the performance at Leeds Uni, and the audience was mostly kind of young men. And actually, I find a lot in my practice that people add additional technologies to my stage presence. So people were like, "Oh, you were using machine learning to," and I was like, "No, it's no machine. We were just writing text." And Sarah had like Sarah and I developed a system where she was controlling the sound, but she didn't let me play sound very often, so I can skip ahead a little bit. She wouldn't let me play sound. She came and turned my synth off. So we kind of switched roles, and I was doing choreography, and she was controlling the majority of the sound. So I think that's all I have time for, right? Or can I like try and summarise in some way?
Yeah, if you can just wrap it up.
Yeah,
I mean, like make it a wrapping up statement.
So through my performance practice, I've been reconsidering how I can explore the relationship between body code, movement, and sound, and develop loads of unfinished ideas that I've got loads of work to do on. That's all I have to say now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. That's great. So next up, find my notes. It is.
Do you want it in
Do slideshow? I've got notes on here, so if you just do slideshow on there, that'd be awesome.
Button is there.
So this is Rebecca Collins with Practicing Orality, Effect and Process. Sorry, it's multitasking. It's hard. Sorry, I'm just going to say that again for the live stream because there was noise behind. But this is Rebecca Collins, and the talk is called "Practicing Orality, Effect, and Process."
Okay, so hello, good afternoon. So I'm Rebecca Collins. So I've got that written down, so I have to say it. And I'm a creative arts researcher. I'm currently lecturing in contemporary performance at the University of Leeds. And my work straddles the fields of theatre, performance, and sound studies. And my practice is mainly concerned with the sonorous aesthetics of contemporary performance and its potential for participatory engagement in a kind of expanded sense. So broadly speaking, in my research and practice, I'm interested in how we are together through sound, in how sound operates within space and on bodies, and how, in turn, through listening, connections might be made between people, places, and things, and consequently how this might inform our thinking about social, political, economic, ethical, and gender-based issues. So I think about this as a kind of attention, a sort of aural attention, and one thing that I ask myself in my practice is how through listening, or by paying attention to sound, can I hear other realities or other worlds? What might an attention to rhythms, atmospheres, vibrations reveal or lead me to think or uncover? So to make this a bit more explicit, I'm going to talk through two projects that I've been working on. The first is called Listening to Water. There's a picture of it behind me. This was a collaboration with two other women, Jane Lloyd-Francis and Naomi Heath, each from distinct artistic practices. So for that project, we set out to explore how attending to ancient well sites through walking, writing and field recordings taken at each site in Ceredigion and Powys, which are counties in Midwest Wales, how they might reveal aspects of the landscape that are more often obscured. And the second project is Stolen Voices, a project that's in collaboration with Johanna Lindsley, who's an artist based in London. And that project also includes a series of rotating collaborators who I'll talk a bit more about later on. I walk across small concrete bridges, snow-filled fields, mud-encrusted paths, and overgrown forests. I see sheep with their lambs as they futilely search for grass in a frozen landscape. I lose my bearings, stray off the path, and encounter ditches, ram skulls, and various types of moss and lichen. These excursions through the countryside of Midwest Wales form the basis of this practical investigation. So the group, three women, spent several months visiting ancient well sites, investigating how a certain level of attention towards the inanimate might increase sensitivity to vibratory relationships occurring within the landscape. So the process itself culminated in a performance and an installation piece. In the installation piece, an audio track plays from a submerged transducer speaker, which is placed inside a metallic bowl. The bowl vibrates with sound, encouraging the gallery goer or spectator audience member to bring their attention to the object itself, as you can see in the picture. The water is topped with a layer of moss green coloured glitter, which you saw in my opening slide, which vibrates and moves and at times spits glittery particles into the air. The track mixes text, field recordings of birdsong, the sound of water moving at each of the well sites, and atmospheric sounds which further emphasise the various textures found at each site. So in combining these elements in my practice, I am interested in exploring what human geographer Kathleen Stewart describes as atmospheric attunements, or the manifestation of a sensitivity to the active, non-representational forces operating on and between materials, objects, space, and contexts. So rather than assuming that life takes place against an inert background, Stewart asks, and I quote, "What happens if we approach worlds not as the dead or reeling effects of distant systems, but as lived affects with tempos, sensory knowledges, orientations, transmutations, habits, and rogue force fields?" So as the three women make journeys to several well sites, Abercegir, Llanbadan, Penglais, Llanafan, they begin to generate a collection of glass bottles, animal skulls, dried leaves, mosses, fleeces, branches, and tree bark, all discovered either en route or at each site. Not only do they experience attunement through their reorientation towards the landscape, but also an attunement towards the gathering of a particular set of objects or things that appear in their presence. They share an unspoken vocabulary of common experiences. The objects house their stories, map their journeys, their relation to each other and to the land they have walked through. So ultimately, to return again to Kathleen Stewart, I'm interested in how, and I quote, "Here things matter not because of how they are represented, but because they have qualities, rhythms, forces, relations, and movements." So here is just sort of the behind-the-scenes aspect of the work itself. So in the original setup, so the piece was at Aberystwyth Art Gallery, part of the School of Arts, and also at Women on Sound 2015. So the bowl sits on a white plinth, and there's some cushions sort of next to it with some lavender oil to kind of further bring a sense of calm and sense of attention. And the transducer speaker, which you can see there in the picture, is one that's normally used in spas to play music underwater. Then it's attached to an amp, which has also been made obvious to kind of reveal how the mechanism is operating. So to move on, I'm going to speak about the second example, Stolen Voices. So Stolen Voices uses listening as both a methodology and as a material. It is a project which uses eavesdropping to physically mine specific geographical locations for sonorous data. It uses sound and voices derived from a process of listening in to consider how their overlooked potential for the creation of performance and the construction of a research inquiry focused on the act of listening as both a spatial practice and as something that is necessarily collective. In lifts, trains, cafes, and on the street, we strain to hear details of the lives of others. This casual intrusion figures the voice as easily borrowed, just as easily stolen. I couldn't help but overhear. So I initiated Stolen Voices in 2014 with Johanna, who I already mentioned earlier. So since then it's taken on a form of different varieties in a series of locations, so mostly in cities and towns along the UK coast. These include Bournemouth, Folkestone, Felixstowe, Seaham in East Durham, not far from here, and currently in Aberdeen. And we often work with a local composer in each of the sites and with a team of eavesdroppers from the local community who might be local artists, composers, sorry, I've already said collectives, ramblers, or youth groups. So the project has taken the form of participatory workshops, new music composition, experimental performance, community gig nights, radio broadcasts, and an interactive installation dubbed the Eavesdrop Box, as well as a book project that's currently in process, which Johanna and I are describing as a sonic detective novel. The forms of the project are developed to suit the direction our listening takes us. A core motivation for the listening itself is a semi-fictional story that we tell ourselves and anyone else who might be listening. Some event has taken place and we have been summoned and tasked with the job of figuring out what it is. So in piecing together this event, we give ourselves a framework to approach a new place, make connections, and try to understand the systems and dynamics and resources and struggles that make this place specific, and try to contribute to the modes of potentiality and inventiveness and imagination that we find. So one of the key assumptions is that listening can be a reciprocal act. We listen and we find ways that other people can listen with us, and these include formal frameworks like the Eavesdrop Box, which you can see here, which was installed in the public library in Seaham. And that was basically a kind of old school interface with some sort of more contemporary technology, Raspberry Pi inside of it. This was developed with Lalia Gale, who's a digital artist working in Newcastle. And the members of the general public could access this, and they were asked just some general questions about sound in the immediate area or sounds that they felt were kind of significant to Seaham. So the key point for that installation piece was to make it as accessible as possible to a general public. So we also have participatory workshops where a series of prompts or missions are aimed at encouraging a kind of aural attention. This in turn gives us access to localised expertise, to a kind of deputised team of agents with their ears to the ground, all working towards the same goal as to figuring out what is going on. So a further part of the project is also interested in less formal interactions, in further developing a method of what we call hanging out. So Johanna and I cultivate our eavesdropping techniques in hotel bars, in museum cafes, in local pubs, and often in archives as well. Sometimes we overhear something that's key to the investigation, and sometimes it's just a red herring. So at its core, Stolen Voices is a research inquiry, some broad overarching questions that are asked throughout the project, which I would kind of like to offer as provocations to your practice, include what is listening and what makes a listener? How does listening affect the quality of an artistic process? How can listening affect our experience and understanding of public and private space and the uneasy borders between the two? Is there an aesthetics of listening, and what skills do we need to be better listeners? These are some images from the community gig that was the listening gig that we had in Siem last spring. So we also ask through the work, what does it mean to live in the UK in 2017, in one of the most turbulent times in recent memory? What kind of structures got us to where we are now, and how do we seek out levers for change? What are the connections between the Victorian pleasure gardens in Bournemouth, the container shipping port in Felixstowe, the refurbished marina built with EU grant money next to a former coal waste dump in East Durham, and the Aberdeen oil industry in crisis? Can attention to these small details, to the sort of micro, can that inform something of the kind of macro dynamics? So what do the details of a specific phone conversation tell us about the bigger picture? This is a picture of us performing. So we also worked with Mariam Rezai, who's a Newcastle-based composer on this piece. So I want to emphasize then that each iteration of the project informs the next as the work kind of grows and transforms, and also that each new piece of the puzzle helps Johanna and I to rethink what came before. We think that this structure in itself can also be ultimately thought of as a listening process. So I'm just about to finish. So yeah, just to kind of end then, I'm keen to think through with others here, or for others to think about in relation to their practice, this kind of notion of listening as a reciprocal act, and how that might kind of infiltrate some of the conversations that we might have further on. And also thinking about listening in an expanded sense that takes into consideration ideas of resonance, intuition, atmosphere, and feeling. So how can we use listening to be critical, to attend to minor vibrations, to bring to the surface modes of thinking and practicing which might otherwise be silenced due to the master narratives of history? And how might we extend our listening to think about archives and historical documents, or to the voices and geographical locations that might not be heard within the clamour of the attention drawn to the larger or more central areas or city centres, perhaps, if we want to call it that. Thank you.
Thanks. So, Alexandra, I think you're next up. Just while we're changing over, I keep meaning to say and then forgetting that we're tweeting using the hashtag taking space. And I know some of you are tweeting, but if anyone else feels like tweeting, then... Do you still need the power, or are you good?
Yeah, can I try this at the top? We'll talk about that a bit. Can I put this into your mind?
Pictures. Does it have a... I've got memory stick. If you want to give them to me on a USB, then I can.
Whatever. I use my student account, which I probably delete soon. So.
I'm giving my Edirome to so many people, it's actually ridiculous.
Yeah, no worries.
Maybe we can use Joe's again, actually, because I'm a bit tied up technically. Joe, can
yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you need my laptop?
Yeah, she's got some pictures. Yeah, I guess so.
It's the problem with Shelly's laptop.
I should have brought my spare one.
I thought you might ask me to bring my phone streaming, and but I definitely didn't want to bring my laptop.
It was just too manic this morning.
So
there's a PDF or there's a PowerPoint. You've got to feed them PDFs. Is it going to be easy?
I don't know.
How do I?
Is it this one? Is it?
No, it's going to be.
Oh, not that one.
Or is it?
particularly interesting.
Right, yeah.
The version of it is never seen. In February,
This one?
Keep going down. That patriarchal. So you've got the PDF and there's the PowerPoint. I hate PowerPoint.
Yeah.
The same thing. Is it easier for me to scroll down with PDF?
I think if we load it up in PowerPoint, then you just need to press the button to go on to the next one.
I had a bad time with a PowerPoint once with a clicker didn't help. So it stayed with me.
Okay. Though it doesn't want to open, so maybe. Is it quite big? The file?
But it's interesting.
Behind the computer screen on the screen.
Again, we don't necessarily recording somebody's voice, but we listen to people and hear what they're talking about. Might inform us thinking about that.
It's very slow.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I say lots of for us, it's, for me, it's not necessarily about specific voices, it's about maybe understanding some of the larger operations that we use to create a kind of fiction.
Just put down the pictures I was going to see. So I can do it like this.
Yeah, so I think if you just click it, it'll move on to the next one.
Each person might have something else.
Yeah.
Right there.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So let's get going with Alexandra Martin, who's talking about her project that I don't know how to pronounce, but I'm sure she does. So.
It's Project Sneferu. People, you may have heard of it as Sneferu, a pharaoh from ancient Egypt. But I've split this into Sneferu. The point of those two words is they mean double harmony. So it's immediately talking about frequencies and things. So it's an installation piece, basically, that recreates and builds upon technologies, musical practices, and mythology of ancient Egypt prior to the Egypt we get all over the place, known as Kemet or Kem. It was originally called Kem. So you get chemistry from Kem, and etc. The narrative is drawn from chematology as outlined by Dr. Abdul El Hakim Aoyan. He's died, unfortunately, so I won't get to meet him. It's to feature both day and night complementary components, literally sticking to what he's given me inspiration to do. So the installation relies on the use of non-conventional instruments and materials to create both the sounds and the energy source, and is written for acoustic and electronic components, providing a blend of ambient, pitched, microtonal sounds. So if you want to know about Hakim, you can go to that particular place there. So biography, basically I try to focus on generating peace and positivity. I've had enough ups and downs myself in my life. So I found the route was to be fit, healthy, have a lovely garden, animals, I studied Tibetan Buddhism, which was really my breakthrough, where I needed to be. Meditation, and then lots of different shamanic practices. I find shamanism is my bread and butter. You know, I really like to go. Okay, so I have been here before and had some funding, which was nice, with Durham, and I did study here after I'd been on the Open University course. So, perspective. I've tried to organise the presentation to encompass both perspective and premise for the piece, to explore points to be raised at the round table as well. I've been on a personal journey of exploration, and this project pretty much does integrate all of that and lots of things I've done musically over the last few years. So how's it going to sound? The sounds are based on specific calculations of frequencies and microtonality from the research of Christopher Dunn, who's a master craftsman and engineer, and Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston. They're emailing me. They're very keen that I do this, and I'm very keen to work with them. Carmen Bolter, she presents this series. I've watched her videos, a set of 5 videos about a different view of the pyramids, and it's most of the work's done on the Great Pyramid, but you know, I'm not going to worry too much about going into any detail there. So the idea of Sneferu is that it's going to be a daytime and nighttime piece, so it should be able to work on its own, powered either by hydro electricity or sludge or whatever. I want it to be self-sustaining during the day and to also then collect energy so it can be working through the night on the power it's generated. But what I ended up thinking was, after doing a bit more research, like someone else said, it's probably going to be a good idea to have it in more than one place, have a day and night combinations. But, so why would I want to do it? Because it's the sort of thing I like to do. This is my area of interest. I like to make instruments and create a whole world for myself to get engulfed in and explore me. I find I think being too worried for me about the outside world, well, you know, it's gone. The minute I shut my eyes, the outside world doesn't exist. So I stay in myself. Why would I want to do this? So recycling, I don't know how much you can see of that. Basically composed of a song for the living and those about to be born, a song for the dying, and a requiem where I gave them bubbles and balloons to burst and pop at will. So that was at university. I'm not going to go into that because I don't know how long I've been talking.
We've still got about 7 minutes.
Oh. So I don't know how much you can see about that. So that was a glass bowl with dried roses. And you use chopsticks to crunch through like snow. These are other things I made. The blue pyramid. There's things like that. Various bones in boxes. I boiled down a chicken and created different instruments. Nobody liked it, but I did it anyway. The feathers, I mean, trying to get people to blow who've never had a singing lesson in their life. No, not good. The whale and the baby is quite an interesting tool because it's one of those stones that sings. So you hold it in your hand and you tap it with a little stone up here. See, this thing does look like a whale. You've got it like that. Michael Tellinger has been to places where they have stones this big and bigger, caves of these stones that sing. That interests me greatly, and he's South American. So I boiled down some beef bones too, and the foil I just put over a cane, a bamboo cane, and you just blow against it, which I found was very delicate, and I really liked it. These are a couple of my tubes from the house. You just bang them with a brass lid, and they can sound really, really nice. So this is kind of building on that. I don't, you know, I'm still building pyramids. So, what you need to know about the piece and how it's going to be is that it's the whole point of chem is that it's a matriarchal based society and it's the science of balance. So Alexandra, what's different about this offering on ancient Egyptian music? So according to Carmen Bolter and Hakim, the Cometian culture, the original version prior to all the rubbish from archaeologists, beliefs and sciences were based on sacred feminine and the sacred masculine working together in balance. So, and they also view things cyclically. So you would work on the cycle of the day and the night, specifically the Nile. You've got to work around the Nile because that's your food, your drink, that's your life. Right, who can tell me what easting and westing means? Based on a cyclic type of thing. What happens in the east?
Sunrising.
And what happens in the west? And that's how they say, they don't have a word for death. So we are easting and westing. And I like that. I really do like that. It takes you right away from this society and all its wacky views. So, okay, now we're going to go a little bit. So, according to chematism, the scarab beetle denotes the hemispheres of the brain. The right hemisphere rules the left side of the body and is sacred feminine. The left hemisphere rules the right side of the brain and is sacred masculine. And there's your scarab. We've all seen a scarab. But when Hakim draws one, he draws it with cross on the top, denoting the hemispheres. This is, I don't know, you may have, what is this woman doing here, blue woman? This is the fact that we can't get away from this ancient Egyptian society. People are still painting Nut, the goddess of the sky. But this is Nut here. Her body arches over Gib, who is the earth. So in our culture at the moment, we have the sky as the man and the earth as the woman, don't we? They didn't back then. So that makes for... So anyway, Nuit, who's arched over, she has 5 points. So basically she gives birth to the sun. Or no, yeah, she gives birth to the sun and it goes through different cycles. So you've got the scarab, which is dawn, Ra, or the ram at noon, Un the wise, afternoon, Aten. These are all things I need to try and encompass in the piece. I need to not make it just another piece of noisy stuff. Or, let's play with peculiar objects. So according to Carmen, the patriarchal society relies on history, linear time, dogma, rationality, waking reality and science. The matriarchal society was, or would be, eternal, cycles of time, ritual, magic and altered states and art. I think I'm nearly there. So okay. So like other people, I'm interested in how my frequencies that I'm going to make are going to interact with bodies. I want them to interact with bodies. Carmen talks about chakras and glandular systems, and the pineal gland. And there's also a correlation of the blue lotus and the papyrus. So you've got the feminine blue lotus, the papyrus, which is masculine, and that correlates pretty well to Native American beliefs with the blue corn and the white corn. So lots of people have this idea in their traditions. This is a bit more about Carmen. So, therianthropy. Why would we have therianthropy? And I thought this was quite interesting because this is also something I want to take into account with my piece. That part human, part animal. According to Hakim, the human being has 360 senses, sensory perceptions, abilities. Not 5 we recognise scientifically at this time. Carmen refers to this as full spectrum consciousness. Buddhists would call it the rainbow body. Christians call it the light body, the white aura. So basically, when I get these frequencies together, and I did notice with myself that about 8 years ago, I started resonating to the pitch of 440. I just started crying. And every time I heard it in a piece, I would just start, ooh, going really, really strange. And it's, that was quite interesting because the Great Pyramid apparently resonates to 440 and it was microtonally swaying. And I could go into great detail on that because it's brilliant. But that's basically it. Dimensions, I could have a 2D, a 3D, a 4D, I could have 1,000,001 dimensions in different places, as long as I can get them to work. So what are my needs? Materials, workspace, technical understanding, funding, R&D.
Nice way to wrap up.
Yeah. And coffee. Lots of coffee.
Coffee is coming soon. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Excellent.
So I just pull this out.
Project it properly.
Yeah, please.
You baby.
Do you want to come and start? Or are you projecting? Or?
Yeah.
No, okay.
Analog as well.
Thank you. Have your laptop back.
Yeah. Overheating.
So, the last speaker for this session is Linda O'Keefe, and I don't have a copy of your talk, so.
That's fine. I don't remember what it is either. So that's okay. I know what it's about. That's the important thing. Yes. So since 2014, 2015, I transitioned from a practice that was being shaped by social theory. It was part of my PhD looking at the social construction of sound in urban places. And then between 2014 and 2015, it transitioned to rural spaces. And because of that transition, it had to incorporate ideas around ecology and environmentalism. So in a way, I've kind of started to shift a bit from pure sociological influences into environmental influences. But the research is incorporating both elements of it, because there is an element of the social as well as the ecological when you explore environmental technologies. In 2015, I traveled to Iceland on a research trip with Chris Watson and Jezreeli French, exploring that deep-seated need by a lot of field recordists to find the clean natural environment, where we're looking to get, the perfect soundscape with the birds and with the insects, with whatever creature is in these habitats, without the pressure of the human soundscape, without the influence of modernity. And I went on this trip with that kind of goal as well, simply because I wanted to go somewhere special like Iceland and field record. While I was there, an aspect of the trip was to visit a hydroelectric power station. And everybody was excited about this because we're getting access to this very different kind of space. Sorry, I get slightly distracted. There's biscuits in front of me now. It's a big distraction.
Keeps arriving.
Resist. No, I'm going to resist. So I went into this space with all of the technology I brought with me. Boom microphones, contact microphones, my Zoom recorders, everything. It was kind of, I don't know what this environment is going to sound like. It's going to be cool. There's turbines that goes down underground and so on. And along with the fellow recordists, we just start sticking our microphones everywhere, as you do, because all of these sounds will somehow be amazing and they'll feed into a composition. So I did this, and after about an hour underground with all of these sounds, I started to feel sick. My body was resonating in this space. These very deep sub-bass sounds were starting to physically affect my body, and I had to leave the building. I started to get headaches. And a number of recordists followed me with the same idea. And right next to the hydroelectric power station is the river for which they're utilizing to power Iceland. And Iceland is predominantly powered by hydro and geothermal powers. And so I decided that I would actually drop some of my hydrophone microphones into that river. And when I did that, I also started to pick up that sub-bass frequency in the water. And I started to think about the landscape around this renewable technology, this environmentally clean energy, and this invisible wall of sound that was emanating from this clean space, touching the animals and the landscape that we didn't see, that we weren't looking to record. that opened my mind to ideas about, questioning the nature of certain technologies' ability to be seen as ethically good without considering that they might have other impacts, that we sort of don't say anything because we can't critique them because they're better than coal and gas and fracking. Following on from that trip, I went to Spain. I've been going to Spain to my mother's house for over 10 years. And in the last 6 years, there has been a massive interest in wind power. So in the region that she's in, which is the Terra Alta region in northwestern Spain, northeastern Spain. Yes, over that side. There has been this massive influx of wind turbines all over the mountainscape. And, initially, again, there's that, look at all, they're utilizing the wind energy. This is amazing. It's environmentally friendly. And, of course, during the summer, it's slightly bizarre because it's Spain. It's just hot and still. But at the same time, I think they do have windy winters. But again, I went with that mindset of I just wanted to document the landscape of these turbines. They're so iconic. They have this beautiful visual presence in the landscape. Again, whipped out all my microphones, my contact mics, everything's going to be brilliant, working into something. And then after, again, days and days of sitting around these sounds, I was like, it's so irritating. This constant whoom, 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 whoom in the landscape. And I mean so loud, and I was like, this is very loud, and there's thousands of them, and it reaches from here to the sea. And I started to think about, well, again, can this continuous sound in this landscape be unobtrusive, not have an impact? I mean, I can still hear the crickets, but are there other things that maybe I'm not hearing? And I came back into the village because my mother lives in this little village, and I started talking to the locals about, what do you think of these wind turbines? And they're they're great, they're fabulous. We got a bunch of money to have them in, and that's making a big difference for the town. Of course, we're now losing the land, and so the kids can't get the jobs, and they're going into the city. So in fact, the population has shrunk. And hold on a second, it's actually becoming really quiet here in our village. There's no work because it used to be agriculture, and now there's these thousands of turbines, and they're controlled by a German company, and no one here is getting a job out of it. And it's kind of, okay, this is a different kind of silencing. This is another invisible silencing that we're not thinking about when it comes to these renewable technologies. Now, there are papers and research sort of emerging about the broader environmental impact of perhaps wind turbines in relation to birds and migration routes and so on. But we're only at the beginning of that kind of research. So there's no real long-term study to state that definitely that is a cause and effect relationship. So the following year, I went back to Spain and I created a residency, and I brought other artists with me. And I thought, well, I'll bring a few people along and see if we're all coming to the same conclusions. So that's sort of what my research has been looking into, this kind of cause and effect of environmental technologies that, in a sense, might be affecting invisible soundscapes, invisible environments, because we don't question, in a sense, some kinds of technologies because we're thinking they're so ethically responsible that we don't have something better, so we have to just go with what we have. So I do have critics about this, the fact that I am questioning this technology because we don't have something better, but I kind of think that you have to listen at the very beginning, and you have to keep listening until you actually find out whether this is the beginning of a silent spring. So out of that work, I have created a number of performances where in Spain I kind of performed sounds. I performed works based on the recordings of those soundscapes to locals in villages around the countryside in the Terra Alta region. It's created a space for dialogue amongst the communities to kind of go, oh, so it's okay to say something bad about wind turbines, because it didn't seem like it was okay that we could critique this. And I have created a larger piece that's going to be presented at a conference this August, which is a big projected video work of the wind turbines. Interesting sounds, design sounds, beautiful sounds, that kind of idealized, soundscape to this beautiful piece of architecture, and then in the middle of the work you hear the wind turbine. And it's such a shock to the system to suddenly hear it. It's so loud, it's so invasive, and then coming back into that nice design soundscape that were the original sounds of that environment following on. So recently I was commissioned by the Octopus Collective to go to the South Walney Nature Reserve in Barrow, so Barrow Island. And I was exploring that nature reserve because it's very much about reinvigorating a space that was a large gull colony. In fact, it's really famous because in the 1950s, some guy went there, did an amazing amount of research on the gulls that were inhabiting there, won a Nobel Prize. At the time that he did it in the 1950s, there were 40-something thousand pairs of gulls. There are now 4,000 gulls in total. And right next to Walney is one of the largest wind turbine farms in the ocean in Europe. And it's, again, pictorially, visually, it's beautiful to see all these things turning in the ocean. But they're right surrounding this nature reserve. Also, to the other side of the nature reserve, you have the nuclear submarine builders, and over there you have nuclear power station, and over there you have a nuclear power station. And so again, there's probably a whole list of other environmental impacts that are happening to nature, to the birds. But then squished in between those areas is the community. And those companies, those wind energy companies, those nuclear energy companies have had no positive impact on the Barrow community. You know, it's an incredibly poor community. Nothing has, things that are happening there haven't affected them. They haven't benefited from this. So this is a community their voice is silenced by this, what seems like really strong progressive technology surrounding them and this nature reserve, which is getting quieter, and their voices are disappearing as well. So I created a work with some people. We collected objects, we did listening workshops, and then we had a performance and had that conversation again. So that's sort of what I'm doing, is sort of activating the silence of spaces, the things that might be impacted on by these energies that we are saying they're positive because they're not another kind of energy. And I think that we need to actually start listening to them now so that we can start saying, well, look, everything needs to be critiqued. We can't just say it's good because it's better than. So other than that, that's one element of a whole other range of practice things that we're doing, but that they will probably come up in our conversations later. So thank you. Also, my website has, if you just go to www.lindaokeefe.com, all of the examples, all of the pictures, all of the documentation of all of those activities are in my blog. Do I go back down?
No, if the others can join you there, and then we'll just go straight into the panel. I'll try and point where.
You did it so
hard.
Thank you so much.
Try to. Alexandra, do you want to join them somehow?
Join us. Do you want to give me your chair and you can have
I'll
mine?
I'll
have
just
my little.
stand,
Oh no, you can sit there and I'll move up. And
Let's go again. Yeah, you move up.
I'll move up. You can
Oh
move
yeah,
over here and
sure. Let's do that.
We're gonna have to. Oh shit! And my
Sorry.
notes, please.
Sorry,
And my
this is what
pen.
I want to do. So just pour it over my head.
Can you all squeeze in a bit for
Get
the
closer.
The chair gets a bit closer.
get really
Right, just-
cozy for the live
There we
stream.
are.
Sit on each other's lap.
Just my turn.
I'm just gonna
Oh,
turn
go this way a little
this way.
You're going to move up this way a bit more.
Okay.
there we
I'll straddle two chairs. It's not going to be pleasant.
I'm sorry, it's very.
Doing a bit of a side bend.
Look at how flushed I am. So red. So tropical.
There we go, we're all in. So, so much territory covered in those talks, it was amazing. But yeah, I guess the general theme of that sort of session was to do with body and sound and bodies in environment and
sound and etc. So has anybody
Amazing summary.
I'm sorry, this isn't my area at all, so I find it quite hard to like sum it up in a really nice way. But it's just like so much like interesting stuff covered. Does anyone want to kick off with a question or comment? Do any of the speakers want to add to what's been said?
I thought it was interesting how the themes that kept coming up, like environments, exploring relationships between like different objects and materials and approaches. How much of it was talking about quite a grounded practice, whether that's physically or not, and looking at like Linda's work that kind of looks at human activity in the environment, so it places the sort of like effects of human bodies acting on the environment as these long-term like mechanical structures. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There does seem to be some kind of train of thought, and you definitely put the right four together, because it's like I can feel there is a similar train of thought, but it is, I don't think you can simply encapsulate it all in one thing, but there does seem to be some kind of focus on our relationship to the world,
Interactivity.
yeah, and its relationship with us conversely, and how we need to have a more ethical approach to our relationship to space. Because it feeds back into our ability to relate to the world. Because if we don't work on that relationship in an ethical way, we don't have a relationship anymore.
And I think, thinking of all of those things as somehow connected rather than as isolated, as just one thing on its own. So, that you can't just think about the visual of the wind farm without thinking about also the sound, and also about it in relation to our bodies as human beings, but also about it in relation to other forms of technology, but also it in relation to things that might also be thought in the future, so that it's not just taking the thing in completely out of context, so that all of these things have some kind of vibrational operation between them in some kind of way.
I think that's probably what I thought was really interesting about everybody's work. I think for me, the term that comes up with everybody's work, especially your work, is kind of resonating. This idea of resonating within us, resonating within our bodies, resonating within our consciousness, and what we do with that resonating information, how we respond to it, whether it's performance or whether it's a different kind of activity. There's some kind of thing about, for me, when I was at resonances, that was...
Yeah, I was thinking about the hidden sound aspects and the kind of like invisibility of these things that are occurring that you just do not come across or see, and how it's something kind of quite magical in that sense of being able to show somebody these forces that are happening, but then what do we do with that information? So for example, so kind of how since architecture and buildings, people may not in the past have considered the sound design of spaces. So like a kind of political thing like a few years ago when it was labelled as building schools for the future, for example, the sound design in those schools was horrendous. So the kind of the forecourts where all these kids would congregate, it was echoing, almost like club space in schools. But then it's how does, in terms of kind of renewable technologies, how and can sound design become a factor in the building of these for the future? And kind of who's responsible for that? And so how can we change it, I suppose, is my question.
Then on the other hand, can we change it without a better alternative? And I mean that's sort of the risk for me, to think about, if there isn't a better alternative, should I be critiquing it? I can't sit on one side.
But until it's critiqued, it's not brought to that attention, is it? And then people are, designers, and it will be thought about a little bit more when it's brought to the forefront of design conversation with design.
I think that link is very much with Rebecca's methodology. This idea of bringing people into the landscape and getting them to touch the landscape and tell stories about it is sort of a way of awakening people's aural visual attention to the environment and how one tells stories about memories of experience and things like that, that maybe that awakens people to, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that just bringing that attention to that sort of sensory knowledge that we have, or that we often kind of overlook maybe for other knowledge forms that have sort of historically had more dominance in our modes of thinking, that listening or sound or hearing has always kind of played second fiddle to vision and to visual dominated narratives. And I mean, also I think what's interesting in what all of us are saying is we're not saying just completely ignore the visual. We're saying that both of them are there, but we're just not hearing the sound that is there. We're just not paying attention to it. It's being silenced. We're being trained to not pay attention to it, or we just by default don't pay attention to it.
Which makes me curious then about your research. Is that in that binary dichotomy between the male and the female, what was the word? Sacred
male, sacred
female. Was there any discussion about listening or visioning? Was there any text that talked about those particular two senses?
Listening or
seeing?
It's more about same with you, the rumble, the very low bass tones. The whole concept of it is being harmonious. If my left brain and my right body are in union, and then the other side. Basically, if you had a man and a woman, you'd have at least 4 ways of them to interact. The whole thing is about interacting and balancing the interaction. You then balance your situation. Then you're in more of a condition to harmonise your landscape, to work in harmony with the resonance of the landscape. The frequencies. I heard a recording made by Chris and Robert, and it did tune me back into different frequencies in my ears. And it was very, very loud for a few days, and now I can literally relax, and I'm hearing it all again. And you're feeling the lower vibrations as well, which you felt. Because we have to learn how to associate with them again. We have to learn to either, to actually integrate them with ourselves. The noises are all there, it's a planet. We live on the planet, with architecture or whatever. Well, we don't make the best of it, do we?
I think one thing that all the works kind of linked together is ideas of like transcribing aura and looking kind of beyond sound and thinking about other ways that connect sound to a space or a body, which I think is quite interesting. And within that comes the idea of exposing process. My work's quite interested in exposing processes. You're exposing like mechanical processes through sound. You're looking at process. You said you left the speaker really and the amplifier really obvious. And in your work, it's very process driven through these looking at kind of exposing ancient cultures through your process.
I thought it was interesting what you said. Sorry, I guess it's maybe process, but also, you said it in your performances, people always try to add technology to your work and add you must be doing it. Do you get a sense that they're trying to legitimize what you're doing through that?
I think so. Some of the comments I get is trying to oh, well, did you use this? No. Oh.
Something about it has less value or something because it's not purely tech, there's not high tech.
Yeah, and I think maybe some people have a really mistakenly highly technical perception of me, so they invent technologies that I'm not really using because to try and legitimize my role and their feelings about me. Genuinely, because I find that when I do live coding gigs, I don't when I play with you, I don't get half the hassle from sound people as my DJ friends do, because you have that hyper technicality of doing code, and it makes people oh.
I kind of found that when I went on the field recording trip, it was what are you recording with? What's the gear that you're using? What's the recording rate? And what, and I was kind of I don't know, I just got these out of my department because I can borrow them and I can't afford them. So they're free, and I'm not really quite sure how this works, and I'm not going to use it because I don't know how it works. But there is this sense of a kind of a validation of the process if you really, really have a deep understanding of the technology, you know, which when I was in the trip, I was kind of like, you know what, it is as important to me in this environment to listen as it is to record, you know, and for me, I'm kind of thinking the first thing I want to do, and that was probably where I might have stood out a bit on these trips, because I would go and sit and just listen. And then kind of go, well, is it necessary to record this? What am I recording it for?
But you got a sweet gear.
I did. It was kind of like, you know, we'd go into these kind of big fields, and there might be like a bird twittering off 5 miles in the distance, and everybody whip out all their technology and plant on the ground for this one bird, and I'd be like, that's really nice to listen to it. You know, what do I want? I don't want to record it, actually, because I don't know why I'd want to record it. You know, so I'm just going to listen. And I guess possibly that was the reason why I left the power station, because a lot of people sat, I guess, with headphones on their ears because they were focusing in on the recording. And I set the gear up, and I just walked around and listened. And when I listened, that's when I started to feel the sickness of this vibration coming up through every bone in my body.
So interesting. It was such a physical response, of like physical sensation that you, and I guess to a degree that you couldn't block it out anymore. You couldn't deny that it was there, and it's interesting that other people also could physically feel that.
Yeah, there was about 2 or 3 others that came out with me, but if you think about, there was about 16 of us in there. You're kind of going, do they not hear it? Is that what's happening? You know, is it that they've built up a tolerance to it, or they can't hear it? And if you can't hear it, then you can't pay attention to the impact that it's actually having.
It's almost having, like what you're describing there to me, saying kind of you've got the confidence to just sort of be a human and say, this is how I'm experiencing this sound in this place right now, rather than assuming the role of, I'm a field recorder at this moment in time, and I'm going to document this. You know, just being able to just be open to that and to experience it in that way.
Yeah, like more from a phenomenological perspective, rather than something that's measured and quantifiable.
I might also just add to that, because when I talk about eavesdropping, I also don't mean that we are literally putting recorders everywhere. We're not like kind of wholesale taking sounds that we hear, but we're sort of using eavesdropping as a way of thinking about that kind of attention, that sort of intention behind listening. But again, it's not to kind of incriminate somebody about something, but it's more to kind of get to get the kind of sonorous textures of a place. So it's not a literal eavesdropping. So often a lot of people similarly will say, well, what are the ethics of that?
I was going to ask you about that sort of thing in the current climate as well.
That's it, we get that all the time, but actually that for me is kind of the least interesting part of the work, and certainly we don't have microphones under the tables, not here anyway. But yeah, and Johanna and I have started to talk about it as a kind of folk eavesdropping that's kind of somehow a bit more innocent, or a bit more, you just happen to overhear something, or you just, and these things are, you also might overhear something that you find in a leaflet in the site that you're working in, or you might kind of through internet searches just kind of stumble across something. So in that very kind of expanded sense as well, a kind of eavesdropping that is about a sort of mining for information in a way that's not trying to kind of make somebody accountable for what they said. And we also don't kind of take people's voices wholesale and put them into the work, but conversations that we have inform our thinking about what might be happening in a place, or what the possible fiction of this site might be, or what are the different multiple events that might influence what it feels like to be in this particular site, and all of that kind of informs then our performed response or our writing that comes out of there. So
But it's really interesting to think about ethics, because I don't know about you, but I eavesdrop all the time. That's what I love. I'm one of those people that sits on a bus without putting something in my ears, because I'm just curious about what people are saying, and it's kind of, should I have an ethical consideration for that? Am I going to use it? How am I going to use it? Am I going to? I mean, I think as artists we can be ethical listeners and kind of be, well, this is what I'll do with it. I'll be very, I don't know, what's the word? Yeah, ethical. I'll be ethical about how I use listening.
How does your Rebecca, I'm interested in how your transcriptions might distort narratives as well, or does that come into play at all, or how your interpretation, how the mediation through you affects stories?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're always kind of putting our own position to some extent. So it will be a perspective that is maybe shining a light in some respects on certain perspectives of a site or of a place. But again, we're not kind of taking transcriptions per se, but we're also we're sort of consulting local experts. We're spending time in the place, and I'm talking with Silvia just before. She said, how do you get communities involved in your work or in your projects? And part of the process is also kind of building on existing infrastructure within communities. So we're also not interested in kind of creating just a context for the work or kind of parachuting into somewhere that we don't live or that we don't know, but kind of there's often quite a long lead into the work that we're doing. So there'll be a kind of initial site recce where we'll sort of hang out in the site where we're working, try to meet local community groups, writers, artists, set up meetings with them or kind of community organisations. And we often work with partners as well. So in Aberdeen, we're working with Aberdeen Performing Arts. So they've also kind of helped to say, oh, talk to these people. And then we'll go back, several weeks later or several months later to then kind of work specifically with groups that are kind of interested in working with us. So it is always this kind of reciprocal notion. And I guess we're also aware that we're not trying to tell the one story about the site. I think it's about giving space to possible multiple narratives, and we do sort of do it in this kind of crime fiction sort of sense. So it's like this kind of
it's like gamifying it almost, isn't it?
Yeah, and that we might follow one lead in a particular direction that seems to be about fishing, but then there's another sort of layer that's about oil, and how does the narrative about fishing and oil fit into why this coffee shop is closed on a Sunday? And so kind of trying to put together these different aspects of a place that also kind of tap into the kind of social, economic, and political ongoings in a site. So yeah, but I think that what we then make from that is never assumptive, I think, or generalized. I think it's always kind of quite pluralized or kind of open to some extent.
I have a question which is totally unrelated for.
Okay.
So we'll have to go to coffee break. So I think this is the last question.
Last question. It's a very quick question.
From Marlo. Okay, you first.
Very quick. So you were talking about that piece where you have the dancer and she was triggering the sound, and you were saying that at one point that she was like, "You don't do anything." I was just wondering, how did you feel about sort of, in a sense, giving control over to someone else with the sound? I assume you designed.
Yeah.
And just kind of allowing that to happen. I know you're playing a role as a choreographer in some way, but you're still giving that over to somebody.
So there are a lot of tensions within our collaboration. We worked very well together, but there were all sorts of hierarchical tensions with me acting as a technologist, her acting as a dancer in performance. But actually, in realization, we were both designers equally in the collaboration. And actually, although I did the symbolic design of the language, it's actually her concept really at the core after she'd attended a workshop looking at sensation-driven movement. So letting go of the sound kind of allowed me to negotiate the sorts of semi-hegemonic structures between us in a way, but it's actually kind of an ongoing collaboration. And at the moment, I kind of thought, we could fix everything through technology. But maybe I'm kind of thinking more and more that we can't.
The dream, Star Trek.
So Marlo wants to know, in some ways the geopolitical and local convergent sound practices here so nicely. I love the merging of histories as well. Do you think there's something to an idea of a vibrational political consciousness?
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that's a big topic.
That's tonight's dinner conversation.
Can we get T-shirts?
Yeah, it's definitely something
Because I mean, the pyramids resonating
That's
lands,
the
resonating
point.
frequencies,
Yeah.
and resonating bodies. I think
Yeah.
that
Energies.
things that are invisible but still resonate. Yeah, I think there's. Yeah, I definitely think there's something to be said
I have
like that.
a quote
Oh,
that
she's got a
maybe.
quote. Quickly.
No, I'm not gonna find it in time.
But yes, there's probably something.
So basically, I can like quote this better, but musicologist Cusick argues that the mind-body problem can be approached through considering performing body and performance and emphasizing corporeality. So the idea that like the thinking about sound through the mind is like a masculine thing, and the feminist, like a feminist approach, could be actually replacing the body with the sound, which enhances like the corporeality, which is obviously like a realization of like a way of sensing vibration. Just thought I'd add that.
Very nice.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, does anyone have a last sentence, or shall we drink a lot of caffeine?
That kind of seemed like a good
That was
ending.
a good ending.
I think so too. Good. So coffee break.
Okay. So we're offline now, right? No.
Not yet.
No.
Better keep our clothes on.
So we're back in 20 minutes after the coffee break for the
And the naked
streamers.
dance.